Marine flooring demands better, and Reflex by Syntec delivers. Our PE material with our exclusive true grain finish exceeds competitors in every aspect while simply looking and feeling better. We set out to prove it in independent lab tests, pitting Reflex against our toughest competitors. Turns out, they're not so tough after all. First up, we put the squeeze on samples to measure what it would take to compress them by 25%. One competitor remained very firm, while others weakened. Reflex found a happy medium in compression resistance, both soft underfoot for shock absorbency and firm enough to resist traffic damage. Next, the pivot test put samples against a rotational resistance device modified with an average weighted person's shoe sole for 2,000 cycles, mimicking foot pivoting. Reflex obtained ideal wear performance, while others showed more severe damage. Whether maneuvering cramped quarters or open walkways, Reflex is steps ahead. Using a Tabor abrader to determine abrasive resistance, samples were turned 1,000 times against 2 rotating wheels. When they weighed in, Reflex with true grain lost just 1.08% of its weight, while the nearest EVA competitor lost 1.7%, over 1.5 times more. But we didn't stop there. We wanted to see how Reflex stood up against the aggressive wear and tear of the Tabor abrader after a year's worth of UV exposure. So we repeated the 1,000 cycles on the Tabor abrader with a UV-exposed material. Reflex again flexed its muscles and showed even less material loss than before UV exposure, coming in at just under 1% weight loss, while the others continued to simply wear away. This demonstrates Reflex with true grain finish handles wear and tear better than the others over time, as well as after exposure to the harsh elements of nature. Flooring may handle wear, but can it stay put? A peel strength test determines adhesive bonds, with samples glued to fiberglass for 8 hours and then pulled from the same angle and rate. Competitors peeled like oranges, whether wet or dry, while Reflex showed 30% more strength than the weakest of the bunch. Who's the strongest of them all? The shear strength test applied lateral forces to adhered sample surfaces and pulled at 1 inch per minute until bonds broke. Reflex resisted, holding a 50% greater grip. The closest competitor didn't even come within 20%. Whether it's unforgiving elements or traffic from the crew, Reflex remains strong. Next, we put the heat on to mimic the top-down heat exposure boat decks experience. For dimensional stability, samples were measured and placed in a radiant oven at 140 degrees for 4 hours, then remeasured. With just 0.02% change, Reflex maintained its structure nearly 3 times better than the worst performer. To keep things ship-shape, Reflex keeps its shape. Light amplification from polished steel in direct sunlight is an issue that can cause permanent damage to the flooring. In these situations, every degree counts for withstanding a potential problem. Reflex tested to have the highest melting point compared to the competition. While light amplification is still a concern, you can rest easy that you have the highest melting threshold in the industry. Stains are an eyesore. So common boating staining agents, mustard, ketchup, soda, lotion, wine, and gasoline were applied to samples to gauge resistance. After 24 hours, Reflex with our true grain finish scored best on the AATCC Grayscale Stain Evaluator. Indeed, Reflex is spot on for taking spots off. Finally, sunshine and time. The last test subjected samples to UV light for 1,000 hours, mimicking a year of UV exposure. Reflex outperformed. In fact, it was no contest. Take a look. Reflex with True Grain has hardly any color change to the naked eye, while others failed color fastness within 1 year. You put a lot of effort into building your marine masterpieces. How do you ensure your work stands the test of time? By outfitting it with Reflex, featuring our exclusive True Grain finish, the finest flooring in the industry. When competitors come up short, Reflex comes out a winner.